Hey, this is Zacklog the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate,
Oh,
and we are joined by Frank Luke,
Hello.
um uh, pastor and author of what was the book again?
Rebirths, and just had another one launched today. It's one of my short stories is in an anthology, Fantastic Schools 3. El Jaji Lamplighter was and Christopher Nuttall were the editors. And this one is Lab Partners, where
Okay,
uh, three magicians in their uh, in their school have for their magical ecology class have to go and find a magical creature and interview it. And they go into the swamps to look for a fairy.
okay.
find a
That that ac-
Lugaroo.
What's that?
They find a Lugaroo.
No, they actually find one of the fairies finds them, and there's a evil cleric in the swamp who is kidnapping fairies, and the fairy village recruits them to help them out.
That
what
sounds
was
like fun.
that actually reminds me of something I would like to see, which by its nature would have to be strictly fan fiction. But I was thinking about this a while ago. There's Harry Dresden and Harry Potter, two magical Harrys, and I was just wondering what would happen if they switched places.
One dies, the other ends this whole Voldemort thing real quick. So we haven't even gotten to the poem yet, and we're having to go back to the poem. This is
Yes,
a new record.
that too. Okay. So, we are getting together tonight to talk about Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, God's Grandeur. Before we get to that, I did want to say, if you like my work, you like what I do, you want to support me, you can do that via subscribestar.com. That's subscribestar.com/Zacklog-the-great. And of course, a link will be in the description. I also wanted to say a thank you to a few of my supporters. That would be to DeadMessenger, Edward K, and Ann H. Thank you for sticking with me. And having said that, neither of my two interlocutors were brave enough to tackle a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem tonight. So it is going to be on me, which I'm fine with.
I just couldn't live up to that middle name. I wasn't feeling manly enough.
Well, I also like the stories by Manly Wade Wellman. There must have been something about that name some time back.
Gerard Manley Hopkins, back when there were still good Jesuits. Okay, let's see. Let me know when that is up.
That is up.
Okay. God's Grandeur by Gerard Manley Hopkins. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man smudge, and shares man smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel, being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with, ah, bright wings. Okay. Would either of you like to start us off?
You go ahead, Mr. Luke.
I was really liking while I was reading it the way Gerard brings in general revelation. I mean, and then he, because he keeps talking about this is God's creation. We need to take care of it. He was living in the Victorian era as industrialization was taking off, and he saw what was going on, and that, the places that he liked to walk as a child were being developed, and this was written kind of as a warning for that.
Yeah, it's I hadn't considered that because like today, depending where you live, like a lot of places you can almost see this happening day by day. Like, the continually building out of, cities and open land being, turned into housing developments and shopping centers.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, for most of the world, that is a very new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for most of human history, the process is not anything like that. And yeah, and it's a valuable reminder that like among other things, normal today is not necessarily normal for history and or nor even healthy necessarily.
Yeah, I'm seeing this firsthand. I mentioned before we started recording, that I went and visited my parents last week, and the hometown is really growing, and not always in good ways. There's a casino in the next town up, and so there's a lot of people coming in to work there, and every piece of land that gets opened is bought quickly, and cookie cutter houses are put up. Some of the farmers are losing a lot of hay to eminent domain so that the streets can be widened and flyovers built.
Well, and it's also, it's also kind of an odd thing because a lot of what is going on today is based on an unbelievably distorted economy.
Mm-hmm.
Because like so much of so much of our economy today is based on debt and imaginary money.
Yes, the
And
dream
like
of money.
and like three cheers for usury. What was I actually remember like the first time I
Usury. Burn them. Burn them. Burn them.
That's anti-Semitic. But
Hey. No, Jewish law specifically forbids usury among brethren.
Allows interest, but not usury.
But I actually remember like the first time I saw anyone talk about that was probably either late high school or college, and I was reading a C.S. Lewis book, and he talked about that. He just kind of made a passing reference to this, and I'm like, huh, that's a little odd, and I didn't really think about it that much at the time, and like seeing how having learned quite a bit more since then, it's like, yeah, this is not good at all, and this is all gonna crash at some point.
I mean, the point has to be coming. I mean, if things keep going like this, people will start to realize that money is imaginary and that this whole economy is an exercise in psychology. That's the thing. You can manipulate the market without spending a dollar. If you make people think the market's going to crash, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not it actually has a good reason to.
Yep.
But
Isn't that what Elon Musk did with Bitcoin recently? Talked it
I
down
don't
on
like
Saturday Night
Bitcoin.
Live, and people started selling it.
Uh-huh.
Which
But
I'd actually kind of like to buy a little more before it turns up again.
yeah, I was thinking about that. But anyway, thinking about, kind of the tension, right, between the natural world and man's development, there's a place I'm not ever going to forget being. Although, if you ask me to tell you where it was at, I would go, oh no, man, it's where it is. It is a little, it was a pond for a pumping station. It was built on the Calcasieu River. And me and my brother went fishing there. And, it's this nice little, so the river's flowing in and it kind of gets just packed up behind like a 12-foot tall little dam. And, it's not trying to generate power. It's not trying to do that. All it wanted to do was back up the water so this pumping station could pump the water out. And so above is this nice little, slow bayou, kind of, a little deeper than average because it's got a dam on it right there. And then the water just whoosh, washes over the top. And it's, built out of like just concrete little bricks. But it's pretty. It's got like, very nice, trees and woods around it. And on the other side of it, the water goes over and runs off down the river again. It's this beautiful sandy riverbed. And I was struck by it. I have the picture of it somewhere. But I was struck by it because I thought, this right here, this thing is how we are supposed to develop this world. The dam isn't trying to stop the river, and it's not diverting it. It's just saying, wait a minute, we need a little bit more water here. And then it lets it go. And it made something that would have been beautiful anyway even more striking. Because just sitting in the middle of that pond in the boat, looking over that dam, it's sort of like, all the sandbars and the different little streams kind of coming back together to reconstitute the channel, was just gorgeous. And then I caught a fish. And so if we could do all of our development this way, where, it's sort of like we accentuate creation and we, help actually beautify it while still getting the use from it, that would be the perfect world. I feel like that's what Eden was supposed to be. But how far things have fallen.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that, on the hey, it's not all bad. I mean, people need to eat. People need places to live. Well, I mean, at the same time, there's a lot of the things people need relative to the things that we have. For America at least, we're well past need, most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, don't take me for some kind of environmentalist saying that, oh God, development's always bad. No, I just wish we could do it with some soul. Don't just plunk down a bunch of freaking plaster houses. The next hurricane is going to melt and tip over. Actually build something worth hanging on to, and don't just, chop down all the trees on your property because you want grass. For God's sake, you live in the pine prairie. You can have both trees and grass.
Well, it's let's see. So generations have tried, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. And it's also kind of a priority thing, I think, that the poem is talking about, because like it's again, there's we need to eat, we need to live, we need to do a lot of things, and there's a lot of things we do above that even if we don't strictly need, it's no harm. But it's figuring out what we're living for, like what's the point of us being here, and for people who have had, kind of, who either never got, a good, upbringing, never were taught this correctly, or have had it more or less stripped out of them by, modern society, you know, the only answer they have is accumulate more stuff.
Yeah.
Work hard. Well, what's the phrase? We go to work at jobs we hate to get money to buy things we don't want to impress people we don't like.
Yeah.
And
One of those.
And it's, I probably would have to admit some degree guilty as charged myself. What are you doing this for? Reevaluating that, especially in light of, God's, of God's presence, of God's, commands for our life. That's probably a good thing to do every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell there are a lot of people who haven't watched a thunderstorm come in after dark. Because you sit there and you look at it, and everything's just black. It's dark night. The stars have been occulted by these towering clouds. You can hear the trees, but you can't see them because it's just that dark. The wind has got like this energy in it, like, oh baby, it's coming. But that's all you've got.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up kind of country, so I don't know. Your mileage may vary on being able to relate to this, but I grew up in the pine woods of Louisiana, so this is where it is for me. And you can just smell the wet in the wind. You're like, yeah, okay, that's a different wetness in the air. That's not our usual soup mugginess. That's actually got some freshness in it. It is going to come a gully washer here momentarily. And you're looking out, and suddenly, from this apparently infinite blackness, there is revealed these mountains coming your way. Behind the front of the wind, mountains in the sky are on their way to your location. And you just watch the whole sky ripple and light up, and you see these gargantuan silhouettes. And then they're gone again. And so you sit there and you wait, and the thunder comes by, and you get to feel that shake you, and then you wait, and after a little while it happens again. And maybe sometimes it keeps on going one part of the sky or another for minutes at a time, but eventually you go back to that blackness and you just have to keep waiting. And just watching it change, watching the shapes move and all of this stuff build up and pile up and get closer and higher and vaster. I mean, it's a worship song.
Mm-hmm.
It is God showing himself like, hey, this is a part of my nature. This wind, this refreshing, but also this terrible power, this vast unknowableness that you can't penetrate just by your own sight, but I will give you glimpses into myself. I mean, you want to talk about God's grandeur.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. And we lose so much of that by having, Doppler radar to watch the storm come in on your TV in the house where none of this touches you. And so, you know what? We have trod, and I feel like sometimes we let every step take us further from God, and the Lord of the universe is out there just displaying who he is in all of these different events every day. But if we pay too much attention to our earthly realm, we miss it every single time.
Well, there's actually, I remember, I wish I knew what year this was, how old I was when this happened. I remember in my hometown, the 4th of July, um, it was threatening rain. And so but it hadn't started yet. So they had the fireworks show, but they were a little edgy, that it was going to be rained out. And so, I was watching the fireworks show, and you look ahead, and there's these fireworks going up, bing, boom, snap, crackle, pop. But like I said, it was threatening rain, and if you looked off to the left, as this was going on, all across the horizon, in the hills, all across the horizon, there's orange lightning. All across the horizon. And it's just like, God, you're kind of making fun of us a little bit here, aren't you? The other thing, and I wish I could remember this is one of those things that, like, you tell it so many times it becomes just a story. Like, you lose a lot of the actual details. But I swear I saw a rainbow at night, which I don't know how that happens, but whether it was from the moon or something. But yeah, on our way home, it was. Anyway, there's actually this one band, their side project from Five Iron Frenzy, Brave Saint Saturn. They have a song called Fireworks, which is about an experience a lot similar to mine, seeing our fireworks and God's the same night. So,
Thought you were going to talk about Ronnie Dio's Rainbow in the Dark for a minute, and I was like, he's not a good guy.
I am entirely unfamiliar with that, so I can't comment.
His performing nickname is the Son of Satan. So yeah, no, not a good guy.
Oh.
But Frank, were you about to say something?
Oh, well, yeah, I've seen the storms come in like that growing up in southeastern Oklahoma. So it was experienced quite like what Nate described.
What was Oh, by the way, an interesting little vocabulary tidbit, since we are, among other things, talking about poetry and having fun with the language is part of that. The word for the smell of rain, like on the like fresh rain on the earth, is geosmin. And it's like our noses are actually really good at detecting that. And it's so we can smell fresh rain. But
that's a plot point in a Terry Pratchett book, by the way. The Smell After Rain. That
which book?
The one where they go to Australia.
The
wizards go to Australia. Yes, The Last Continent.
My background came in handy tonight.
Also petrichor. First rain after it's the smell of rain on dry ground.
Okay. Anyway, but so
that one's Greek.
We were never really off topic in quite the same way, but to get more directly back to the poem, it's one interesting thing with Gerard Manley Hopkins is, like, he very clearly makes very careful choice of every one of his words, and so the world is charged with the grandeur of God, and there's, like, the word charged. There's about, like, 5 or 6 different meanings, and each of them could work in a different way in this poem. You all right there?
Knee stiff.
Position,
and it sort of did a pop and lock.
Yeah,
then a pop.
I sympathize. Anyway, but the world is charged with the grandeur of God. Well, there's, like, charged like a battery, the world is absolutely loaded up, to the maximum with God's grandeur, with God's glory. And like Paul says in Romans 1, all this is out there in the world if we have eyes to see it. God's nature is shown to us if we do not deliberately turn away.
Right.
But so many of us do. Then there's also kind of archaic today. I don't know how in use it was at his time. I charge you to go and do this thing. The world is charged with the glory of God. It is a duty upon the world and upon every piece of the world to show forth God's glory. And that includes us. We're a part of it. And it is our duty to show forth God's glory, God's grandeur. Then there's
that we do. I read just a quick snippet today about the youngest astronaut, or the youngest person to pass the astronauts' endurance trials and all that is a 19-year-old young woman. And she is specifically training to be one of the people on the first missions to Mars. And I'm like, that's awesome. You see, that's the kind of stuff that, we need to be, that we need to be celebrating. And those are the things that humanity was made for.
I see the woman part. I'm a little skeptical because a healthy society protects its women.
Yeah, but sometimes they volunteer to do things.
Yeah.
You can't protect somebody who wants to run out.
Yeah,
Some people charge for the battle.
Sorry. Men are disposable, women are precious. This is a fact of mammalian biology, like it or not. Anyway, but
I'm cool with it. But I was very impressed by that. You know what? Pray that she discovers many wonderful things.
And then
including the value of a home on Mars.
I don't know how well this one fits, but like I said, just look at the word charged. There's also then the winged hussars arrived kind of charge.
I do not believe the grandeur of God is bearing down on us in attack formation.
Hey, I can't see that one either.
I don't think he's coming galloping in just like chop.
I will defend. I don't think that one's the main idea, but I will defend that one on one point. According to Christian theology, as I best understand it, we are in enemy-occupied territory.
Yes.
This world is currently in possession of Satan because of our screw up, and so we are currently in enemy-occupied territory. And so God's grandeur may be charging down upon us to break the siege as we speak.
I feel, in direct contravention of the first point where it's filled to the brim, to its maximum potential, because a charging attack means to bring something, namely troops, to a place they were not before. You can't charge from a place you're at to the place you're at. It doesn't work that way.
Oh.
I'm not saying all of these work at the same time. Yeah. They're just different possibilities, and it's an interesting way of trying to sort through his intentions here.
I think that's the most. I think in probably a year, that's the most we've actually discussed the writing of something. So I ain't mad about it.
But well, and then also it's he talks about the man's leaving our mark in not the best ways a lot of times on this world, but then in the second stanza he says, and for all this nature is never spent. No matter how messy we are, no matter how much we tread upon the earth and leave it seared and smeared, there is still all this beauty out there that we haven't touched. And that we, there's so much that we never will.
And nature will overtake what man abandons.
What's the oh, there's that series of paintings. Oh, what's the guy's name? The Course of Empire. Do either of you know who I'm talking about?
Mm.
I know about this because it's in our. Okay, here, let me see. Course of Empire paintings. I think I actually used one of these as the cover. Yeah, by Thomas Cole. The Course of Empire by Thomas Cole. It's a series of 5 paintings where, like, the first one is just this basically empty naturescape, and then there's like light settlement. The second one is like light settlement, and the third one is this big great city, and all this art and statues and ships bringing trade. And in the fourth one, the city is overrun by barbarians and being sacked. And in the fifth one, you see nature coming back in and growing up over these columns and all these things. And it's a wordless commentary on civilization and nature and how these things do and don't work together.
And that relates to the first poem we discussed, the three of us, the one about Kull and Atlantis, because the king of the oak trees pretty much told him, when the men are gone, the island is ours again. We were here before you, we'll be here after you.
That's one of the cool things. At one point, we had this house, and it had some live oaks. I am here to tell you now, those things were the most imposing biological entities I've actually ever encountered. Because each one of them was 6 feet, like 6 feet through the beam. It was, I'm talking massive trees. Like, could not tell you how old they must be. But there's just big old live oaks, and you sit in the branches, and you're like, this branch is older than anyone I know. And this thing is mighty and massive, and you just kind of look at it, and you're like, okay, this tree is a tree. So it has itself that it's supporting. There are at least 2 different kinds of vines growing on this thing. We got a wisteria, we've got some kind of other just sort of creeper vine. We've got ferns. There's an owl that lives in one. And then you look around and you're like, there's these giant ants that live in there. They don't bite. They're just freaking enormous. And then there's these little, like, totally awesome looking mantises with like little green bodies, brown forelegs, brown head. And then like their legs go from green to brown and back. And they scuttling around, and you're just like, there's so much going on in this tree. I forget where I was going with this. I got lost talking about trees. Where were we before? Oh, the king of the oak, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I know for a fact this thing has got to be 100 or more years old, much more. Are these trees older? I know these trees are older than me. I know they're older than my dad. I know they're older than my grandfather, probably my great-grandfather. They stand a very good chance of being older than the nation I was born into. These trees were probably born into France. And in that time, they never went anywhere, and France became 3 different countries on this one particular patch of earth at different times, just passing by under the shade of these branches. And
the tree may yet survive after the current country has departed as well.
They've been tested by God knows how many hurricanes, and really only God does know. But yeah, and so sort of this enduring thing of nature, like we talked about with Kull. It's humbling. And so the same thing with God's grandeur. If you want to think highly of yourself, stay in town.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to realize that maybe I ain't so much, go out into nature. I mean, look, you can put in all your effort, and the river's still going to wash you away. It doesn't get tired. You know, you can grow as big as you want, be as strong as you want. You're not going to take down that tree.
Yep.
Barehanded, anyway. You can, you know, says you can rage and howl and dig and do whatever. That mountain remains. You know, the land will outlast you. And when you start to experience it, you begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, I'm taking things a little too seriously. All of this doesn't care about me, and that's great.
Also,
probably been here and will be, and I will not have mattered to it at all, and that's freeing. I can now spend my time, instead of acting like I am a concrete fact of the universe and that I have to set up eternity myself. Instead, I can, you know, says I can do what Ecclesiastes wants me to do, which is, you know, enjoy your work. You know, enjoy your work all your days under the sun. You know, says eat, drink, make merry with your friends.
It's also probably has something to do with the fact that people who so many people who live all exclusively in big cities seem to be going increasingly insane.
Yeah, I can see that.
But I also have to say I find this kind of find Nate's lesson on human humility, a little funny, because I just listened back to, because I just finally got around to posting it, our talk about G.K. Chesterton's The Sword of Surprise, in which you know, a large theme of our talk there was, wow, it's pretty amazing what the human body is able to accomplish.
No, it is. I said two things can be true at once. We're amazing creatures, but at the same time, we are not that enduring, and the works of our hands are not. I saw somebody they had posted a bunch of it's a bunch of photos that people taken of like rusted out old tank hulks in like just random fields throughout Eastern Europe, and you're like, these are some of the mightiest things that have ever trundled across the land, and here they are with daffodils growing out the top. That's pretty great.
Life is short, but the art lasts, or the craft lasts, as some people like to translate it, has been a major theme throughout human existence. The Gilgamesh epic has that as its running theme, and it's what Gilgamesh learns at the end. I'm going to die. I'm going to die anyway, even though I've had this whole quest looking for eternal life. I'm still going to die, but that city will last. And the city that he pointed to, according to the poem, was Uruk, and it was he would have done that about 2700 BC, and it was occupied continuously until about 700 AD. A Muslim invasion.
Like the Christian kingdoms of, you know, North Africa.
Yeah.
Now it's downtown Muslimville, but used to be those are all Christian kingdoms and flourishing.
What was it's also interesting. Like I said, there's this very it's Petrarchan sonnet. The turn is the last 6 lines, and though the last lights off the black west went, though everything looks like it's coming apart, though the world is spiraling into collapse, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost is watching over the world, and God is, however foolish and selfish we are, God has not thrown us over, and
right.
he still has a plan, and he is still working in us and through nature to redeem us.
And that's a reference to Genesis 1:2. There, that last line of his with the Holy Ghost brooding over the earth. Genesis 1:2 says that the Spirit of God moved over the waters. The word "moved" there is the same Hebrew word that's used for when a mother hen hovering over her brood to keep them safe. Can also be used for a vulture that's waiting for its prey to die.
Okay.
They're both anticipatory waiting, although what you're anticipating. I love that. I love those two lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What I said earlier about, I feel like we've trod our way out of heaven sometimes. This is that, yes, we may be walking as fast as we can away from God, but everywhere you go, His Spirit is hovering, waiting for you to encounter Him. God has not abandoned us. And He's waiting there to catch our eye with His bright wings and to bring us into that warm breast and to give us the peace of a proper mind. And
Well, it's
just anything that portray, and it's interesting that, God's grandeur, like, you think of grand things as being impersonal, like I've mentioned, the storms and rivers and mountains and whatever. But here is this grand God, brooding over us, not just sort of watching aloofly, but actually, engrossed in what is happening over this bent and busted place, just waiting. It reminds me a bit of the image I get is actually of my wife changing one of our kids' diapers. It's kind of like, yes, this is not a fun or pleasant sort of facet of things to be experiencing. But at the same time, it's what is necessary, and it's done with love. And in the end, you pick them up and you give them a hug and a kiss, and they, grab your hair and stick their fingers up into your sinuses, and you go, yay, it's the baby. And that's what this reminds me of. It's God and His very small, helpless children. And He's just like, hey, guys, hey, don't worry. You're crying, I know, but I'm going to clean you up, and we're going to make it all better.
It's a strange thing because there's, like, in terms of like how we relate to God, it's there's that aspect of it, and then there's also as God's children, and then there's also, I can't remember whose phrase this was, but like, there's also times where we are we're not children gone astray. We are, in our relations to Him, bloody-handed rebels.
Yeah.
And and each of us does both at different times. And and the treatment we get from Him varies depending on I guess what's going to call us back. And it's now I'm starting to think of C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain, which if either of you have not read that, is definitely worth looking into. And now I forget where I was going. So, if one of you
open-handed rebels against God instead of going astray reminded you of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, no, but I forget where all that was supposed to be leading.
We must all be tired. Well, maybe not Frank. He seems all right. He hasn't lost his way yet.
Oh, but if this had been last night, it would have been a very different conversation.
I enjoyed this poem more than I expected to.
Yeah. I had to read it a couple of times.
Yeah, and like I said to Frank, I think before we started, Gerard Manley Hopkins, it's not easy reading, and he kind of dances on the edge of intentionally obscure, which I think a lot of I think there's a lot of poetry written today that is that way, or at least it's taught that way, and it kind of makes me angry because, like, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. And again, part of the reason I decided to start doing this project, it's like, there's a lot more here than you've been taught, and if you don't think you like poetry, well, maybe you just had really bad teachers.
Oh,
you probably had really bad teachers. I will say about the.
I overheard a teacher once doing the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and I was thinking, are you trying to instill a hatred of poetry into these students? The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. I was like, oh, stop, please.
Usually this style of poem gets on my nerves. I'm like, why are you going to take, like, it gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, line break, crushed. I'm like, wait, is the oil crushed? Are the men crushed? What is happening here? Honestly, if you're gonna write poetry, I prefer Frost because it's just very simple, and it's just sort of like, hey, here we go. It's sort of bread and butter poetry, but at the same time, it still manages to land, and you're just like, yeah.
Well, and like, okay, that point in particular, it's like if you're taking like olives, or I don't know what other I guess corn. There's others you could do this with, but olives would be like the big thing, and you squeeze them, and the oil squeezes out of the olives, and so it gathers to a greatness, like you see it oozing out of this as they're being crushed.
I don't understand the line is that I don't understand the presentation.
Well, and
it's a stylistic choice that does not resonate with me at all.
He's got weird line breaks in here.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Actually, that was
smudge and shares man's smell. The soil line break. It's like, and shares man's smell. Let's start sort of a new but related thought. The soil line break is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And it's like, although interestingly, I realized I had been wearing boots too much one day when I walked out in my front yard barefoot to just go grab the mail or something, and walked across a patch of clover, and I was like, oh, that feels so good. Feels so nice on the feet. Why do people get mad about clover?
Well, and that okay, so that line, the soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod, and then again, referring back to the Bible, and in particular the Old Testament, I know with Moses, I don't know if there's other places, and I suspect Frank could probably tell us. I know with Moses, God instructed him at one point, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. And it's a really interesting point. I mean, it's an interesting point in the poem. It's also kind of an interesting thing in that story, because an odd thing about holy things is, like, sometimes holy things, you are absolutely not supposed to touch them unless you have permission. You don't touch the Ark of the Covenant. But in that case, you're on holy ground. Take off your shoes. Be in contact with the this sanctified place.
That's because God was commissioning. He was consecrating him. The problem that you get a lot of times in the Old Testament and, coming around sort of, God's glory pre-Christ is that you are contaminated with death. And, you are a vessel of corruption. And so it is not that God wants you dead and is vengefully striking you down. It is that his nature is so pure that it destroys any of this death and, purifies any of this corruption so strongly that you just die because you were a part of it and it has been taken out. So you're done. And that's where, sort of these ideas of cleanness and uncleanness were coming from, which is why, things like Moses being allowed into this holy ground or Isaiah's vision of the coal from the altar. Usually the stain of death and mortality and corruption goes out onto other things. But in this case, it is taken away, especially for Isaiah. His unclean lips are made clean and the coal remains clean the whole time. For Moses, right, his past as, the oppressor of these people and, the beneficiary of it has come to an end. He is now going back as God's prophet to save them. And so, his impure past is being taken away from him and a new man is being sent in his place. It's super fascinating. And, there actually makes a decent parallel with what we're talking about in this poem because getting out and sort of divesting yourself of some of these accoutrements of our modern day civilization actually is really good for you, and it makes you think, and it gives you a chance to be in a way that you normally wouldn't. And so, to an extent, that's God's nature showing up in nature again, is that it can help to wash away some of this accumulated awfulness of modern culture by connecting with nature and making yourself a part of it for a little while.
I'm going on a camp out next weekend with the Royal Rangers here in Iowa. And my favorite part of it is the mornings when nothing is happening. You come out of your tent and you just be in the sunrise.
I was on a ranger camp out in Virginia with our church we had up there. And I did not know this, but apparently in Virginia sometimes you get the Milky Way. When we were on a camp out, we were coming back from something that had gone way over. I think it was the evening service, and we had to sort of like walk around this little field, and you look up, and it's just so much. And I always enjoyed, being around the fire with everybody. And, instead of all of us, being like, hey, let's play games or whatever, it'd always be, talking, me and some of the other commanders talking to the boys about things that were important. Passing down, stories of, doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Being like, hey, here's an example from your forebears. Here are principles of honor and dignity, and all the while, we're roasting meat. We're roasting meat over an open fire in the middle of the woods.
Wait, I just have to ask. These kids had 4 bears, not just one. Wow,
4.
That was quite a camping trip.
It was pretty great. But yeah, so being out there among all that, it's cleansing.
Yeah, it is. It's something that we miss with all the hustle and bustle and running around that we do these days.
I actually there's a trail through the woods not too far from where our new house where we moved not long ago, and I went out there with with my my boys and some my nieces and nephews were visiting, and we went down just a little bit of that trail the one day just to find out. And he's my older son has been occasionally bugging me to get back out there, and it occurs to me that I probably should make a point of that. Now, I will say in my defense that where we are, if it rains one day for like the next week, it's gonna be muddy. So finding a good day for a trail hike, you have to be. It takes some careful timing.
Rubber boots.
You know what? He has some, and I could get myself some, so that might be a
That
good
actually
plan.
makes the hike more fun.
Getting stuck.
I spent half my childhood in rubber boots. I think the first day I went to a public school, I wore rubber boots because that's what I wanted to wear. Make a statement.
Was so returning to a line from the poem, and I don't know. This might be. I fear this might be one of the last things we're going to cover because we are coming up on an hour, which I don't have a hard rule about that. But returning to a line from the poem, it will flame out like shining from shook foil, which it's one of those things with one thing with Hopkins is, especially the first one or two reads through, it's kind of easy to get caught up in just the sounds. And like, okay, after you get the sounds, then you are trying to piece together, like sometimes you have to kind of, reconstruct the syntax, and what are these words actually mean when you put them together. But like, I was thinking about that, coming up for this, and I'm like, okay, if you take a square of aluminum foil, and you just take this, and you have a light source nearby, and you just shake it, and you see, not only do you see light, but you see it like coming out all over the place, constantly shifting, and you never know where it's going to be. And that's also God's glory in nature, because it can be all over the place, and you never know where it's going to be. And even if you are one of these unfortunate people, basically more or less locked inside dark grim city, they haven't managed yet to cut you entirely off from nature, and there still are birds, and there still are plants and trees around sometimes, and you never know if you keep an ear open, if you are not entirely ground down, where God's grandeur is going to suddenly shine out and, grab you and show you something beautiful.
It's true. See, I had a joke about, if you shake foil, there aren't going to be any birds around, but I feel like your point has completely overshadowed me. So,
What was it's kind of funny. I feel like we've almost entirely focused on like the first half of this poem, and I feel like there's a lot more. At the same time, I also feel like I'm starting to run down a little bit.
we'll go down and there lives. Go find the dearest freshness deep down, and pull it out from where it lives.
It's and just the conclusion that like the last two lines on this, it is this sudden grab and suddenly grabbing you and pulling you, and like it kind of feels like emotionally like he just grabs your head and is like, "No, look this way," and it is true, really amazing, really powerful writing here, because the world needed me to confirm the talents of Gerard Manley Hopkins.
Yeah, one of the top Victorian poets, but not recognized as such until after his death.
Well, and that's the also the kind of interesting thing, like you don't really know, time is the ultimate critic, and there's a lot, all these things going on now, coming out now, and what people are going to remember 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, what's going to last and what's going to disappear is impossible to say from where we are now, and it's which is actually one thing I've tried to say a few times. If you want to look for good writing, if you want to look for writing to learn from, look for something that's lasted a while. Look for something that was written 100, 200 years ago that people are still talking about today. And because something that was published yesterday and everyone's all excited about, well, it might be good, or it might just have fastened its hooks into the latest trend and it'll be forgotten tomorrow. But something that was written 200, 500, 2,000 years ago that people are still talking about, there's something valuable there.
Oh yeah. Was it C.S. Lewis said for every new book you read, you should read 3 old ones?
I don't remember the ratio, but I definitely remember the general advice.
It was Lewis. I'm sure about that.
Yes, I know he said that. Okay. Nate, did you have any last thoughts on this one?
Man, I have shared so many thoughts. My very easy to imitate rambling style. No, it's just it's God's grandeur. I don't feel like it needs any more explaining. If you stop thinking for a moment about just what the next acquisition will be and sort of what the next task is, and look up, the Lord of Heaven is waiting there to mug you with a realization. He's right there. And so, just break out of this modern rat race every so often.
Frank, any closing thoughts for you?
I don't think so. I think we've talked about everything that I had jotted down that I wanted to mention. So.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you both for joining me tonight, and I hope everyone who's listening enjoyed this. And good night.